Thank you for that kind introduction. I see there's a gavel here. Do I get to use it? Or is there someone in the room with the ultimate authority to use it? Do I need to hide it from you? Thank you all so much, especially to the top table and Suzanne for organizing this. I have a lot of friends here, and so I'd actually like to start by saying good afternoon. And I'm Southern, and so that means you're supposed to respond in kind. So take two. Good afternoon. So I'd like to start, as I said, by acknowledging my many friends here, and if by accident I overlook you, please shout out your name. Of course, Roger Slickeisen was mentioned. He is the president and chairman of the great organization Defenders of Wildlife. I'm very proud to serve with him. I have friends here from the Sierra Club. I have friends from the Natural Resources Defense Council. I have friends from Earth Justice. Steve Rohde, are you here somewhere? Just an email buddy. Maybe he doesn't exist in real life. The great Marianne Vohlers is here. Marianne is a writer of exceptional abilities who, amongst other important things, wrote what was perhaps the first ever story on mountaintop removal coal mining. It was published in Mother Jones magazine. Who else is here? John Gensler, classmate of mine from the Harvard Kennedy School. He's actually a dual degree candidate over at that other little school in Cambridge, MIT. He is a child of the mountains, born and raised in West Virginia, whose goal in life is to see not only the end of MTR, but to start a clean energy company in West Virginia. And I think, frankly, he'll be governor of that state and perhaps serve in many capacities beyond. Also here is Mary Lynn Evans, who is a longtime anti-mountaintop removal coal mining activist. She uses her considerable talents as an artist. In particular, she has made a powerful documentary called Coal Country, which she generously allows to be shown without any cost. And her producer, Phyllis, is also here. My friend Barb's cousin is here. I understand there's a University of Kentucky Alumni Association locally that is represented. So just to all of you, I want to say thank you. No one does any of this work alone. And although I stand at this podium ostensibly by myself, I am flanked and surrounded by and embedded with an extraordinary group of people. Also, I know someone from Appalachian Voices is here, which is a tremendous consortium that represents grassroots organizations throughout Appalachia who are doing the day in and day out work opposing this environmental tragedy. So everyone up here was a little bit panicked because I didn't have a hard copy of my speech, whereas I, of course, am cool as a cucumber, because I know I've got it right here on my computer. I'll just try to make sure that one, India RE doesn't start playing on my iTunes, or that my dad doesn't IM me and say, "How's your National Press Club talk going? How's it going?" It's great, Dad. Okay, so now for my little talk. I've been conferencing for 3 days. I've been representing Population Services International at both the Women Deliver Conference and the Global Business Coalition. I'm very glad to be here. By this time, I am a little sleepy, so I look sleepy and I'm not brushing my hair, so I just put on extra jewelry. I am very proud to be a Kentuckian. And of the many things my Creator has seen fit to allow me to accomplish, being an Eastern Kentuckian is the simple fact that brings me the most honor, the greatest sense of self. I love and am proud of being a hillbilly. I trace my family in the mountains of Eastern Kentucky back at least 8 generations. And in Kentucky, we talk about counties. So mine include, and are not limited to, Martin County, Lawrence County, and Boyd County. In 8 weeks, I will know even more about my mountain people, their original homes, holdings, and habits. My genealogy is being prepared for me as a gift. My life, a very well-traveled one, will see nothing like the wonderful adventure of journeying back through my family history in the Appalachian Mountains. It is by far the richest and the sweetest trip. A few tantalizing details have slipped out. Thanks, Aunt Mitty. My 5 times great-grandfather, a pack, in his will bequeathed, amongst other things, 247 acres, and not 1, but 2 copper stills, and an acre of land which he insisted be set aside for a meeting house at which all denominations could worship. I can hardly wait to learn more. There is no better home than Kentucky. We have a deeply ingrained mystical sense of place, a sense of belonging that defines us. Although I currently make my home in rural Middle Tennessee and in Scotland, Kentucky calls to me. It is my Avalon. A few examples. As a teenager, I took a friend to see my beloved great-aunt Pauline's farm in Lawrence County. She passed away when I was in only the 4th grade, and I had not been to her farm since. Nevertheless, I had never even driven myself there, but I navigated perfectly to her small steading on Little Cat Creek without making a single wrong turn. Equally, in college, I drove from Lexington, Kentucky to Big Hill in Morrill, and again, although I had not been there since the 2nd grade, I navigated without putting a wheel wrong. If you need more evidence, in 2008, after doing a flyover of legal and illegal mountaintop removal coal mining sites in Pike County, I drove to Black Log Holler, where my paternal grandmommy was raised. I had never been there before. Pulling onto Black Log, something ineffable, without words and deeper than memory, from a place so primal, it transcends thought and conscious action, I stopped at the foot of a long drive. And although I had never seen it, I recognized it. I was unsurprised when I looked that the mailbox said Dalton, my grandmommy's maiden name. Yes, folks with whom I am kin live there yet. I called on the residents, and like a funny cliche, the old woman accused me of being from the law or a tax collector. The only thing missing was the rifle across her lap. I don't see that little white house nestled in Blackleg Holler as much as I feel it, right here. But the ache I feel for my mountain home is now more than a bittersweet nostalgia accrued through inimitable generations of belonging. There is a searing tear, a gaping wound in the fabric of my life and in the lives of all Appalachians. And it gets bigger with every Appalachian mountaintop that is blown up, every holler that is filled, every stream that is buried, every wild thing that is wantonly and recklessly killed, every ecosystem that is diminished, every job that is lost to mechanization, every family that is pitted one against the other by the state-sanctioned, federal government-supported, coal industry-operated rape of Appalachia, mountaintop removal coal mining. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest in North America. They are indeed so old, geologists rather poetically, I think, call them deep time. They may well be the oldest mountains in the entire world. I'm here to tell you, mountaintop removal coal mining simply would not happen in any other mountain range in the United States. It is utterly inconceivable that the Smokies would be blasted, the Rockies raised, the Sierra Nevadas flattened, that bombs the equivalent to Hiroshima would be detonated every single week for 3 decades. The fact that the Appalachians are the Appalachians makes this environmental genocide possible and permissible. By the end of our time together here today, I hope you will commit your journalistic integrity to stop mountaintop removal immediately. Our Appalachian Mountains reseeded the whole of North America after the last ice age. I smile when I remember that. What an act of biological generosity. The genetic stock of our mixed mesophytic forests, in part because they were an unglaciated refuge for many species, exceeds any value that can be conceived of or articulated by the human mind. Ancient, life-giving, a perfectly complete and closed loop of life and economy, the preciousness of these mountains is a natural endowment that should be treated as sacred. Instead, they're being blasted to smithereens. Coal lies in those hills, as we call them, but y'all know that. And there are essentially three stories I'm telling today. An ancient one, a tiny bit of the Appalachian genealogy, an old one about how the current exploitation and abuse was set up in the late 19th century and perpetuated in the 20th, and how technology is being used contemporarily to permanently and irreversibly obliterate a mountain range, a culture, and a people, to say nothing of the original American art forms the people of Appalachia have given birth to. The broad form deed, one of the most diabolical, abusive legal documents ever created, as stunningly arrogant and entitled as a white man buying from a Native American vast tracts of land for a nickel. In the following section, I will be quoting from Henry Caudill, Chad Montree, Ron Eller, Silas House, Jason Howard, and Kentuckians for the Commonwealth Archives. Can you tell I just finished graduate school? Really keen on attributing. In 1887, John C.C. Mayo rode up in the hills with silver dollars sewn into his clothes, taking his wife with him in order to make a good impression. He thus bought the first mineral rights, using a so-called broad form, which he popularized across the mountains, came to be known as the coal fields. The methodology of the swindling and manipulation is documented. Quote, with every convincing appearance of complete sincerity, the coal buyer would spend hours admiring the mountaineer's horse, while compliments were dropped on every phase of his host's accomplishments. He marveled at the ample contents of the mountaineer smokehouse and savored the rich flavor of the good woman's apple butter. After such a visit, he and the man of the house would get down to business, and before long the deed or option was signed with the uncertain signatures, sometimes just an X, of the mountaineers and his wife. And what exactly did those broad form deeds say? I will read briefly to you from three I happen to have on hand. Print is very interesting and small. All the coal, minerals, and mineral products, oils and gases, salt minerals, salt water, fire, potter's clay, all iron, iron ore, stone, and such standing timber as may be, held, representatives, successors, or assignees deemed necessary for mining purposes, including timber necessary for railroads, branch lines, and thereof, etc., etc., etc. The right to enter upon said lands, use, operate same surface thereof, use of, for this purpose, divert water courses. This is important. In any and every manner that may be deemed necessary or convenient for mining, hereby released from liability in perpetuity or claim of damage, free access to, upon, and over said land. All the coal, gases, oil, and minerals of every description in, upon, and under my farms and tracts of land situated in the county of Letcher, state of Kentucky, on the waters of Bull Creek and its tributaries. Extracting, handling, refining, shipping, transporting all said minerals, whether contained on the said premises or elsewhere, and for any other purposes. Earlier in the late 19th, 20th centuries, agents for land companies following Mayo's example swept through the region buying up mineral rights, sometimes for as little as 50 cents an acre, separating the use of surface and tax liability from the natural resources that might be below. In other words, the hillbillies still paid the taxes on the land. Initially, the deed separated mineral rights from ownership of surface land, but in the 1940s, courts began interpreting broad form deeds to mean the surface owner also sold with the minerals, important, the right to extract them through whatever means the mineral rights owner chose. Written in finely printed legalese, the broad form deed signed over the rights to dump, store, leave upon said land any and all muck, bone, shale, water, and other refuse, to use and pollute water courses in any manner, to do anything necessary and convenient to extract minerals. These clauses eventually caused much regret on the part of the seller's progeny when Kentucky courts continually interpreted them in favor of the companies. Broad form deeds transferred the land to the land company all the mineral rights, the right to remove it by any means necessary, leaving the original owners with the taxes. With the advent of surface mining in the 50s, these old deeds took on new meanings as mining companies sought access without regard to any rights of the owners. Roads cut across pastures, forests devastated, fields ruined, water supplies polluted. State courts upheld the rights of miners, convenient and necessary. Families found their meager hopes of subsistence destroyed. They abandoned the farmsteads. They were landless migrants, unemployed workers, roamed the region, or left the mountains entirely. It was not until 1987, in a split decision by the Kentucky State Supreme Court, this interpretation of the broad forms was finally struck down. In '88, by a margin of 4-1, Kentuckians spoke at the ballot box. They voted in favor of the Homestead Amendment, which restricted strip mining by the mineral rights owner, which restricted strip mining by the mineral rights owner without the consent of the landowner. 5 years later, the ruling was upheld. I used the word rape earlier. When I was a student at the University of Kentucky in 1988, I remember clearly sitting in the Kappa House kitchen drinking my morning cup of coffee and discovering that spousal rape was still legal in my state. Oh my gosh, I thought, if I were married, it would be legal for my husband to rape me. I felt horrible shame. Kentucky's gender laws have come far since that time. In fact, Governor Beshear just signed a progressive policy requiring that men who beat women and against whom an order of protection has been taken out must be monitored with GPS. I salute Governor Beshear and the legislator for passing and enacting this law. Kentucky's environmental laws, monitoring, evaluation, and enforcement need to move apace. The Surface Mining and Reclamation Act, passed in 1977 during the Carter administration, was inadequate to begin with. Coal mining techniques outdistance regulation immediately, not to mention the appalling lack of oversight, reporting, and enforcement. As shocking as strip mining was then, mountaintop removal is warp speed, overdrive, strip mining on steroids. First, a permit is applied for. Often, at least until recently, with Lisa Jackson at the EPA taking over that administration, they were largely rubber stamped. A friend in West Virginia called it creeping permititis. What few restrictions there were on the permit process could easily be waived by merely applying for a permit variation. Often, however, a coal company didn't even bother to apply for a permit. They found it more convenient, if you remember that word, to mine without any permits and simply leave. Others were good enough to self-report, and the state often showed them leniency for having done so. Access roads are made. The timber on those mountains, one of the most rich and biodiverse habitats in the entire world, which shares species with places like China, are not even harvested. The old growth trees, hardwood forests, in some places 30 species can be found standing together, are simply razed. Next, explosives are trucked in. Explosives so volatile they must be carried on separate vehicles. Small hills are drilled into the rock of the mountain, And every single day in Kentucky and West Virginia, around the clock, 7 days a week, 2,500 tons of explosives are detonated, blasts 1,000 times greater than the blast that brought down the Oklahoma City Federal Building. What used to be home for human, flora, and fauna, and the potential economic boom for a classically exploited and distressed area has become, in the coal company's callous terminology, overburden. The Smoky Mountains, as the crow flies, not so far away, generated $1 billion in tourism revenue last year for the state of Kentucky. Using shovels the size of buildings, the essential ingredients of deep time is pushed into the lauded and mythical hollers of Appalachia, indiscriminately burying all that is produced and lives there, watershed, perennial, and permanent streams, all plant and wildlife, contaminating the groundwater in the process. For example, children in eastern Kentucky draw creeks black. They don't know they're supposed to run clear. Using a drag line 20 stories high, the thing rips out ribbons of coal like little layers of chocolate cake. They're scooped out. In some cases, the site, once the coal company is finished, is simply abandoned. The coal company often sets up a shell company or two to operate a job and then defaults on the bond. In other cases, the company decides to make the site a model example of their responsibility. They return, quote, to approximate contour. Of course, the word approximate makes it a farce. The word was a government concession to powerful coal interests. Thus, allegedly, the shape of the mountain is somehow reconfigured. They plant non-native, fast-growing, invasive grasses, and then, with their incessant propaganda, celebrate the site as an example of how good for Appalachia mountaintop removal coal mining is. Why they even built a prison on one former site. Guess what? The foundation subsided, and the locals call it sink. On another site, they built a golf course. I'm not too keen on reinforcing stereotypes about my people, but I don't know a lot of hillbillies who golf. And so in less than 1 year, Massey, TECO, Argus, Consol, Patriot, International Coal Group, and others who join in this list of shame bring down ineffable mountains of profound past that should have infinite future. And Americans take even less than 1 year to burn up the coal for which it was all done forever. Shame on us. This practice is a stain on the conscience of America. There are many myths promulgated by the coal companies and those they keep dependent on them through the mono-economy they have created in the mountains and maintained since the first broad-form deed. The Charleston, West Virginia paper this week captured one such enduring myth well in an op-ed, talking about an EPA public hearing at which a permit application for what would become the largest mountaintop removal site in West Virginia was being discussed. A man went all the way to Charleston from Pike County, Kentucky, to plead, please approve this permit. It is all we know. The Charleston paper said, what an indictment. What a penetrating condemnation of all the leaders in this young man's life, from home and school to county commissions up to legislators, governors, and presidents, and anyone else who meets and greets and congratulates themselves for being for jobs. No matter what you think the EPA should do in regarding Arch Coal's Spruce No. 1 mine in Logan County, projections for coal employment for the future are the same. Coal will never employ 100,000 West Virginians like it once did. I hope to have the chance to address with you some of these other ridiculous yet persistent myths during the question and answer portion of our time. There are many individuals on the ground who live with the daily consequences and the nuisance problems, as they are called, caused by mountaintop removal coal mining. Two daughters of coal miners, Judy Bonds and Maria Gunno, for example, have been granted the Goldman Environmental Prize for their grassroots organizing and heroic efforts. There's another wonderful woman whose name I can't think of right now, who decided to get a college degree at a local community college when she was reached by a local grassroots group that was teaching her how to go to her state legislators and lobby for her and her community's own best interests. Her daughter graduated from high school the same time she graduated with her degree from the community college. Upon receiving her transcript, she thought she'd made a 40. Her daughter explained she had made a 4.0. It's important that those of us fighting the coal companies stick together, because they can make me feel absolutely and totally crazy. Their denial, sleight of hand, smoke and mirrors, and relentless propaganda is absolutely stunning. But I know what is happening. I know how outrageous it is. Yet they try to make us feel like lunatics, out of touch with reality, and like fringe conspiracy theorists. Because no one would really let that happen. Our government would stop it. 4 million pounds of explosives every day is a fact. I wrote a paper about mountaintop removal coal mining for Sophia Gruskin at the Harvard School of Public Health. It was hard. It allowed no advocacy. I didn't know how not to include adjectives. She said it would be a good exercise for me, and indeed it was. I got my 3 minutes of advocacy when I presented my paper to my cohort, who naturally were a highly intelligent, profoundly energetic, and very engaged group. Not a single one of them had ever heard about MTR. And when I finished my paper and was leaving the class, they followed me out onto the streets and said, "Who were the migrant laborers who were being recruited to work in these sites?" At the Harvard Kennedy School, I thought for sure this issue would be the cri de coeur of my class. The only other person who had heard of MTR and who joined with me in the fight to stop it is in this room, John Gensler. Together, he and I applied to Kennedy School's most prestigious venue, the Forum, hoping to bring Mr. Blankenship, the chairman of Massey, Lisa Jackson from the EPA, Bobby Kennedy Jr. They turned us down. My own class presented to one another every Thursday our personal work and interests. I couldn't get MTR on the docket. The opportunity to be here today is very powerful and very special. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions. And I would like for those of you who are already working with me on this issue to feel free to raise your hand and contribute. We all have done a lot of work. We've got lawyers, we've got environmentalists, we've got regulatory people, we've got folks who are very interested in creating clean energy jobs in the mountains. There have been some updates just today about solar and wind farms being built in West Virginia and Kentucky. Is this Jim Perrione gentleman here? We got an email through Kentuckians for the Commonwealth that he was going to be there. If he's not here, I'll read you the email. And also, the actionable thing I want everyone to consider doing upon leaving here is to write Lisa Jackson at the EPA and say, veto the permit for Arch Spruce Mine #1. Thank you.